The White House says it'll release President Biden's top-line spending request for fiscal year 2022 soon. Some experts expect defense spending to stay flat in coming years. Dov Zakheim is senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, former Undersecretary of Defense Comptroller. He's writing about the defense budget with another former comptroller, Elaine McCusker, in Defense News. Dov, thanks very much for coming on the program. It's good to talk to you again. You and Elaine write in this piece about a letter that 50 members of the House sent to President Biden March 16th comparing our defense spending with the 10 countries behind the United States. And you write, this statement's misleading to the point of irresponsibility, completely overlooked as America's role in the world. Isn't that the crux of the discussion in the first place, Dov?
Well, up to a point. I mean, if you're an isolationist, you think you're going to save money. In fact, you'd probably have to spend more money just covering all our coasts. Maybe you'd need 50 aircraft carriers, 25 on each coast, to make sure nobody gets through. But the real issue is people say we're spending too much because these other 10 countries are spending so much less. But we have commitments around the world. We have interests around the world. We have allies around the world. That's number one. Number two is it's not at all clear to me, at least, or to my colleague, that, in fact, we are spending more than even our number one competitor, which is China. And the reason is China's so-called published defense budget, or what they call their official budget, doesn't count a ton of things that we in the United States do include in our budget. It's not transparent at all. I'll give you some examples. Spending on R&D, spending on space, spending on benefits. They don't have benefits for their troops the way we do. I was on a commission that looked at benefits for our forces and retirement benefits. And we actually published a book of several hundred pages just of benefits alone. We're so different from the Chinese in that regard and in so many others. My guess is they're spending nearly as much as us, maybe as much as us. And that's just one. So what about the others? Well, obviously add those on, and we're not spending more than the next 10.
And you and Elaine argue in this piece that's not the right way to approach this. What is the right way to approach the right amount of money that the United States should spend on defense each year, Dov?
Well, I think Elaine and I both agree that you have to look at what are our commitments and responsibilities, number one. Are we determined to keep those? What is the price of not keeping them, by the way? And once you do that, you then look at the fact that we have to have certain force levels to maintain those responsibilities. We're not going to cut back on benefits, so we have to factor those in. We have to factor in research and development. We're talking about all these new cutting-edge technologies, AI, quantum computing, and so on. We've got to spend money to research those. You've got to develop those, and then you got to bring them into the force. We have to procure all sorts of systems in order to be viable and in order to deter the bad guys, whether it's China, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, whoever. You start adding those up, and you're above $700 billion.
Budget and strategy, though, especially in the defense realm, have been chasing each other's tails for decades in this town, Dov. How do we ever get to a point where that tail chasing stops and we determine how to either integrate budget and strategy or determine which one comes first?
Well, I think the answer is, of course, that the strategy has to come first. The trouble then is when you look at the strategy, then look at what might be available to you realistically, and then you may have to alter the strategy. We've avoided that for a very long time. The previous president, of course, had a strategy, get out of the Middle East. We see how well that succeeded, and God only knows if we'll have to come back even more. President Obama, the same. He wanted to get out and wound up sending more troops to Afghanistan. So we have to look realistically at what this world out there is like. The enemy, as Secretary of Defense Gates said years ago, the enemy gets a vote in this. We have to look at who's threatening us, who's threatening our friends, who's threatening our interests. And then we look at what do we need to protect against those threats? How much do we hedge? How much risk do we accept? And although it sounds like we're spending a ton of money, certainly relative to 1.9 trillion that we just spent and 1.9 trillion that's being asked for now, it's not a ton of money. But we really have to look at, okay, what is the defense of our country, of our allies, of our interests? What's that worth? That's what you spend your money on.
30 seconds, Dov. Is the top line indicator that the Biden administration asks for the leading indicator of where they're going to go in this?
Well, of course, but we don't know what that top line is yet. Classic combat between OMB and DOD. The Office of Management and Budget wants to cut it further back. The Defense Department is just trying to hold the fort at about no real growth, but at least covering inflation. It's a classic battle, and hopefully the Defense Department will win, as it has very often in the past.
Dov Zakheim, thanks very much as always.
Thank you for having me.